Hey, good evening, everyone. My name's David Golub. I'm the guy who does East Coast Roads, and thank you for joining me tonight. This is a preview of the 20th anniversary celebration for the website. As of a few hours ago, marks 20 years from when work on this website began. And with that, you're all invited to the full 20th anniversary celebration, which will be taking place on December 2nd of this year to Saturday. It'll be sometime in the afternoon, the exact time to be determined. I'm guessing probably sometime around 2 p.m., something like that. I'll be joined for this by probably several other members of the Road Geek community, still to be determined exactly who's going to be there, but should be a great event, and you're all invited to, tune in on YouTube that afternoon and see the full thing. But for now, let's do a quick preview. So 20 years ago today, work began on the site, and it began with this picture. I guess first of all, let's talk a little bit about how the idea came to be. So I had discovered the Road Geek community, which at that point was still in its very early days, especially Steve Anderson's site, nycroads.com, and its companion sites for other major cities. It was 2003. I was a freshman in high school at the time at Schreiber High School in Port Washington here on Long Island. And I got pretty excited about this stuff, and I was reading on Steve's site about why things are the way they are. He's done a lot of really good work researching the history of our highway network. And as I'm reading about this stuff, I'm thinking, it would really be cool if it was possible to go on the internet and virtually explore some of these places that aren't necessarily all that easy for you to get to in person. And this was back in the days before there was such a thing as Google Street View. And I was someone who had a very strong interest in computer programming. I ultimately wound up in a career as a software engineer, and I had been self-teaching myself a lot of this stuff going back to when I was a kid. And I said, okay, it may not exist, but I've got the skills to make it happen. Not necessarily for some of the stuff in other areas that I was looking to explore at that point, but I could build something for Long Island where I was and make that virtually explorable for people from other areas who might want to see it. So it started out on August 16th, 2003, was a trip down to Long Beach to visit my aunt who lived there. And on the way, I took my camera and started snapping away. So this was the first picture. It was the oldest picture. It is the oldest picture on the site. And it may not be obvious if you're not familiar with the area, but this is actually a sign goof. So Zeckendorf Boulevard and Shopping Mall are in the wrong order. The exit for the Roosevelt Field Shopping Mall comes first, followed by Zeckendorf Boulevard. So if you take a drive down there today, they have fixed this, and the sign that's there today says Shopping Mall Zeckendorf Boulevard instead of the other way around. So in the time since, this site has grown to a great degree. So there are now over 98,000 images. I had actually set a goal to try to get to 100,000 in time for the 20th anniversary. I didn't quite make it, but got very close to it. These images cover over 1,000 roads in 10 states, as well as the District of Columbia, a little bit of DC. That's an area that I'll need to cover some more in the future. And it's over an area extending at this point roughly from Beckley, West Virginia, all the way up to Boston, Massachusetts. So that's what I've done. Now let's take a look at what all of you have done with that, with some traffic data from the website. This goes back to 2017 when the East Coast Roads name was adopted. There is data that was collected before then, but it wasn't all in a consistent form. So what I've got unified is since 2017. So in that time, there have been over 7.2 million photo views, as well as 14,000 searches in the search box at the top of the site. That search box was added in February 2021, so that's over a slightly shorter time period. 35,000 document downloads from the document library section of the site, and over 1,100 people following the site on Facebook. So lots of you have joined in the fun, and I thank you all for making this such a success so far. So all this begs the question of, what's the most popular page on the site? So it's actually not even close. There is only one page with over 250,000 photo views, and it's actually over 500,000 photo views that page has. And that page would be the Long Island Expressway. So given the history of the site, that's where it started out, I think there's a little bit of Long Island bias, both in terms of where the fan base is located and in terms of what I've kept most updated. So I think that in part explains why, but nonetheless, it is a huge runaway success relative to all the other pages on the site. Not that there hasn't been plenty of success elsewhere as well. But so that's number one. Some honorable mentions, if you will, with over 200,000 photo views. We have several roads. We have the New Jersey Turnpike. We have Interstate 278, the Staten Island Expressway, Verrazano Bridge, BQE, Triborough Bridge, Bruckner Expressway going through New York City. We have I-87, the New York Thruway and Northway. And here on Long Island, we've got 27, Sunrise Highway and Montauk Highway. Then, with over 100,000 photo views, a slightly larger group, we've got the Northern and Southern Parkways here on Long Island. We've got I-95 in both New York and Connecticut. We've got 25 Jericho Turnpike here on Long Island, the Garden State Parkway in New Jersey, I-295, which is a free alternative to the southern portion of the New Jersey Turnpike, as well as the Taconic Parkway and I-84 up in the Hudson Valley. So those are our most popular pages. So, for a quick look back, let's talk about the 3 incarnations of the site over the years. So it originally started out as the Roads of Long Island, and you might ask, why this clunky name rather than something more straightforward like Long Island Roads? And the answer is that at the time, that name was actually already taken. There was another road geek on Long Island by the name of John Leibowitz who had a site with that name. It was actually a very good site, but it no longer exists at this point. But it did in 2003, so I didn't want to compete with his name. That wouldn't have been fair since he took it first. So I came up with a slightly different name. So during the time that this name was in effect, back then, I was a high school student, early college student, didn't necessarily have a lot of money to spend on web hosting and domain names and things like that. So the site was on free hosting at the time, and to find free hosting without banner ads, well, you end up with a lot of companies that would go out of business. So it actually went through 3 different URLs. There was rhodesli.nexthost.com, rhodesli.superihost.com, and rhodesli.z42.us. And of these 3 URLs, the middle one is the only one that is still operational to this day. The other 2 are with companies that are of blessed memory at this point. So this time, it was from 2003 to 2007, roughly corresponds with my years in Port Washington, last 3 years of high school. The area covered by the site extended from Midtown Manhattan to the Montauk Point Lighthouse. And as time went on, eventually I graduated from Schreiber High School, and I was fortunate enough to be admitted to college at a little school up in New Haven, Connecticut. Some of you might have heard of that school. It is called Yale. And I enrolled there in September 2006. And since I was going up to Connecticut a lot for college, I decided to make a bonus section of the site for Connecticut highways. And as time went on, I started adding more to it and came to realize that I had basically outgrown my name. You know, I had adopted a somewhat expansive definition of Long Island to include all 5 boroughs of New York City. And then with adding a bonus section on Connecticut, and I figured, well, I didn't have any New Jersey content yet, but it was only a matter of time before that was going to wind up happening. So I said, okay, time for a name change to something that better reflects what the site actually is at this point. And it was basically 2 things that seemed like the obvious answers, either Tri-State Roads or Greater New York Roads. And I wound up going with the latter. And in September 2007, I relaunched the site at a new URL, greaternyroads.info, which is still operational to this day. And I continued growing the site over the course of my time in college and beyond through graduate school and into my first job. So this roughly corresponds with my years in New Haven and Morningside Heights in Manhattan. So when I finished college, I went to graduate school at Columbia University, which is in Morningside Heights, and I moved in to off-campus housing there. And when I got my first job, I basically decided that I was going to stay for a while, and I wound up staying till 2017. So at the time, there was a commuting website. It may actually still be around even, where they used to say, you know, we'll provide you with the information you need on your commute throughout the tri-state area from Wall Street to Weehawken to Westport. And I said, well, that doesn't even seem like that big an area, so I can one-up that. So I used to say, my site will cover you from West Hampton Beach to Willingboro to Windsor Locks. Okay, Willingboro was just the exit passing by on the New Jersey Turnpike, but still, nonetheless. So it was covering a fairly broad area. And it was during this period that I started going to road meets and connecting with other members of the Road Geek community, expanding out the area that was covered. And as time went on, I started going to some overnight meets, and it grew. beyond even Greater New York roads. And, when I was adding stuff on, say, the Jersey Shore and Utica, okay, I could say that it was within the area, but once I was going to West Virginia, there's really no way you can say that that's New York anymore. So I ultimately decided that it was time for another name change. And this is the final name change for this site, even if I do hope to eventually get some degree of bonus coverage going out to the West Coast, but given that the focus is going to be on the East Coast of the United States, or eventually the East Coast of North America, because there will be Canada content eventually, I am going to be sticking with the East Coast Roads name permanently. So we're looking here at I-64 in Virginia, heading out to West Virginia. So the site moved to a new URL again, eastcoastroads.com, where it is today. This time roughly corresponds with my years in Mineola, where I live today. As I was living in Manhattan for a while, I'll put it this way. When I was a kid, if you had told me that I was going to be living in Manhattan, I would have assumed you were talking about the one in Kansas. And the only way that wound up happening was because it was Morningside Heights, which is a much quieter neighborhood than most of the borough. But even despite that, it was really just too much noise, too much crowding for me, and it reached a point where I decided, yeah, I'm ready for a change. So I moved back out to Long Island to Mineola, where I am now. And this resulted in me getting a car. So up until this point, having been living in urban areas, I did not have a car, and the content on the site had been obtained either in other people's cars or on mass transit. And that changed with me moving here. So at this point, the area covered by the site includes more far-flung locales, such as Boston, Baltimore, and Beckley. And these years also included the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the hope had been to really expand out over a larger area. And for a couple of years there, that basically had to be put on hold because of the needs of the time with the pandemic. But over the last year, I've started to travel more. I was at a road meet in Harford County, Maryland back in May, and then more recently in Buffalo a few weeks ago. So there's a lot of new content that's going to be coming out of that in the months to come. So that's how the site has changed. Now let's talk a little bit about how things have changed in the region with the highway network. So when I got started, I remember thinking, it would have been really cool if I had been building this back several decades earlier when the highway network in the area was first being built. And unfortunately for me, I was born a few decades too late to be able to do that. And I had figured, oh, well, I guess I'll just be documenting it in its final form. But as I discovered as time went on, I actually was, in some sense, building part of the historical record, because even if there wasn't that sort of revolutionary change, there was nonetheless evolutionary change in the highway network. And if you go driving around today, sooner or later, you're going to come across stuff where it's going to be pretty clear that it's not 2003 anymore. Things have changed, and I dare say for the most part for the better. So let's take a look at some of these things. So first of all, we do have a few bona fide new roads. To start out, we've got a missing link in I-95 in Pennsylvania that was filled in, making one of the most important interstates in the country finally contiguous from Miami all the way up to the Canadian border in Maine by filling this gap in Pennsylvania. We've got a new US 301 toll highway in Delaware, as well as the Hillsborough bypass in New Jersey that did not exist. We've also got a number of bridges that have been replaced with more modern structures. We've seen replacements of the Whitpen Bridge, the Tappan Zee Bridge, the Goethals Bridge, the Kosciuszko Bridge, even the Pondetti Bridge. And if you've never heard of the Pondetti Bridge, well, hey, that's another reason to join us on December 2nd, and you can learn some more about it. We've also had some bridges that haven't been replaced altogether, but have nonetheless seen significant improvements to them. There's been a refurbishment of the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey, and a raising of the roadway to make space for tall ships on the Bayonne Bridge between Staten Island and New Jersey. We've also seen some widenings of several of the major highways. There has been an extension of the HOV lane on the Long Island Expressway here on Long Island, and an extension of the car and truck lanes on the New Jersey Turnpike. We've seen some conversions of roadways. There is a conversion of New York 17 in upstate New York to become I-86. This is actually the longest running project that's been documented by the site. It started before the site existed and is still in progress as we speak today, but there has been, in fact, a lot of progress over the course of these years. We've also seen some conversions of some more minor highways into major, I don't know if you'd call them exactly surface roads, but roads that have got some traffic lights that fit in better, less disruptive to the surrounding neighborhoods. These are a little bit more controversial. There's the Oak Street Connector in New Haven that became Martin Luther King Boulevard, and the Sheridan Expressway in the Bronx that became Sheridan Boulevard. We've had some interchange improvements in various places. There was the Shinnecock Squeeze at the end of Sunrise Highway on Long Island that got eliminated, and it's now just a straight run going out there. Much less traffic. The New York Thruway, you used to have to go through several traffic lights to get between the Thruway and I-84. There's now a direct connection that was added. In New Haven, there were several left exits, two of them to be specific, at exits 47 and 48. Those have now been eliminated. Those exits are on the right, like most exits. There's a new exit for Pudding Street on the Taconic Parkway up in Putnam County, and a direct connection to the Harlem River Drive at the end of the Manhattan leg of the RFK Triborough Bridge, whichever name you prefer for it. Now let's talk a little bit about tolls. The idea that toll booths were going to become something that was fast on their way to becoming history. Thinking about it back in 2003, you would have said that was pie in the sky science fiction. But here we are, and we've got cashless tolling on MTA crossings with the New York State Thruway Authority and even the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. So at this point, actually going through a toll booth. Okay, here with the Pennsylvania Turnpike, for the moment, they've kept some of their toll booths up and you drive through them, but you don't have to stop. But the idea that you have to stop at a toll booth if you don't have Easy Pass is rapidly becoming something of the past. Now let's talk about exit numbers. There have been some changes in that department as well. The Taconic Parkway didn't have exit numbers at all back in 2003. Those have now been added, and they're some of the first exits using a milepost system in New York State. And we've also had a couple of our highways get converted to use a milepost system rather than the sequential system that they used to use. I-84 in the Hudson Valley and the Hutchinson River Parkway in the Bronx and Westchester. We've also, here on Long Island, we've had a resurrection of a decommissioned route number as a signed route on New York 25C along a little stretch of Union Turnpike. It's not official. It happened due to what was presumably a contractor error, but nonetheless, it is signed again. All right, so those are some of the things that have changed. Now let's take a look ahead at some of what's planned for the region in the years ahead. So there are some additional bridges that are slated for replacement. We've got the Outer Bridge crossing at the other end of New York 440 on Staten Island, going to New Jersey. There's the Delaware River Bridge that connects the New Jersey and Pennsylvania turnpikes on I-95. And there's the Washington Crossing Bridge between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, somewhat more minor bridge, although it is, as its name suggests, where George Washington crossed the Delaware. Lots of things with Washington in the name, but this is one where George Washington was actually there, even if there wasn't a bridge there yet, back during the Revolution. We've got some widenings that are planned. The southern section of the New Jersey Turnpike still has only 2 lanes. That's going to be widened to 3 lanes, and there's probably a good chance that there are going to be some new exits added in conjunction with that. We've also got the Quickway, New York 17 and future Interstate 86 in Orange and Sullivan counties going through the Catskills. That's 2 lanes. That's also going to be widened to 3. Cashless tolling, the New Jersey Turnpike is one of the few major highways that hasn't upgraded yet. That will be coming. Both the New Jersey Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway, both under the jurisdiction of the New Jersey Turnpike Authority. That'll all be going cashless in the years ahead. And on a slightly more controversial note, New York City will be adopting a congestion pricing toll, where if you want to drive into the city south of 60th Street, at least if you want to be somewhere other than the FDR Drive or the West Side Highway, you will need to pay a fairly steep toll, where the intent is to keep the traffic down there and provide funding for mass transit in the city. Heading up to Connecticut, there are still a couple of traffic lights on the Route 9 Expressway in Middletown. Those are going to be getting eliminated. And the interchange between Super 7 and the Merritt Parkway will be having the missing movements added. You can see here, heading north on 7, you can only go south on the Merritt. You'll be able to go either way once this has been fixed. And New York and Connecticut remain 2 of the few states where there are still sequential exit numbers, like you see here up in Albany. And Connecticut has already begun the process of switching over to a milepost system, and that'll be happening over the course of this decade. New York hasn't officially committed to a timeline yet, but presumably the Federal Highway Administration will be forcing them to do that. So we'll be seeing consistency across all of the states throughout the Union. All right, so that brings us to the end of this preview. So I hope that you will join us on December 2nd for the full anniversary celebration. The exact time will be getting posted on the East Coast Roads website, the AA Roads Forum, on Facebook. So however you follow the site, you should find out about this as we get a little bit closer. And in the meantime, I encourage you to keep following the site at eastcoastroads.com, like the site on Facebook. And thanks so much for joining me tonight, and have a great evening.